Hey Rice fans, welcome to another episode of Rice and Advice. I'm Dr. Jarrod Hardke, Rice Extension Agronomist with the University of Arkansas System Division of Agriculture. Let's get started. Let's talk about a few more things we can do to improve our mid-season nitrogen timing. One of the things that we've started to recommend, thanks to the work of Dr. Trent Roberts, is the use of the GreenSeeker handheld in determining our mid-season nitrogen application timing or needs at all. So essentially what we do, I know we're standing in a field of plots right now, is we go out there at the pre-flood timing is when it's most critical to basically drop a flag in the ground, bicycle flag, take about 1/3 of a cup of urea and add it to roughly a 5 by 5 foot spot around that flag, so we kind of have a maxed out nitrogen spot in that field. And ultimately what we're going to do later, after the flood's put on and the actual pre-flood nitrogen applied to the field, is be able to come back at that mid-season nitrogen timing and use this handheld to compare the relative greenness of the field to that reference plot. And really, through his work, Dr. Roberts, we've been able to determine, or he has determined, that a certain level at which we need to recommend making a mid-season nitrogen application and the point at which we really don't stand to benefit much from one of those applications. So it's really simple. Point and click, so if you can use a computer and a mouse, I think you can handle this. The only trouble, of course, is you're actually going to have to walk the rice field in order to use it and get those values. So just to provide a few examples within the plot work and examples that we have here, a few relative differences, we'll have a really quick look at that and kind of what some of the readings are that we can expect from using this device. So there are a few important things to note when trying to use the GreenSeeker. A lot of guys like to hang a weight from the bottom of the GreenSeeker to give them a constant distance from that upper canopy, because this thing actually does control for you being either too close or too far away from the canopy to get an accurate reading. So we can take a quick look at that just as an example. So again, using this thing's pretty straightforward. Pull the trigger one time. Oh, look at that, I got a reading. Not sure exactly what it's capturing from this angle, but definitely not the way I want to be holding it. It's not level to the ground, which is why having a weight helps. So I'm over some very thin rice with a lot of water showing. This is really an example of an area we wouldn't really want to be sampling with the GreenSeeker, and that's because that reflectance off that water is going to give us a false reading off of that. So when I actually use the GreenSeeker on this, hey, I get a 0.41. Probably not, maybe higher than that, may actually be lower than that, but hitting that much water, we're not really going to have that great of an idea. So we want to avoid this. Just for reference, we are starting to get near mid-season in this rice. We're just a little bit early. This is a 0 nitrogen check, so this rice has received no nitrogen. That's one of the reasons it is so thin at this point. But again, we can get too far away from it. I'm still not too far away from it. Finally, EF, error far. So that's not going to work. I'm going to lower it considerably. I'm going to go again. I'm still getting a reading, and eventually I will get down to the point where I get EC, error close. So again, I want to keep it to a constant relative value of height above the canopy so that I get a consistent reading as I'm walking. So if we were in a field looking at a reference plot, I'm basically going to not have a very large area, so I'm going to do a couple of different trigger pulls over that reference plot to give me an idea of where I should be, and then I'm actually going to walk through the field and hold the trigger down while I walk, and that will give me an average of the area covered. So let's have a quick look at what some of these readings are, working through some different pre-flood nitrogen rates that we have out here in the field. So again, this one has a lot of water showing, so can't be too confident in the actual value that we get. See, that one was a 0.08. So let's actually try to do a few where we're walking to get an average as we go over things. They're an average of 0.2, not too great, I can tell you from experience. Let's try the next one. A little bit of water showing there, but 0.64, much higher. We can see we have a much better canopy. Let's go up one more nitrogen rate. .74. Okay, we're getting there. How about one more? 0.63, that's supposed to be a higher N rate, but it doesn't look like it's doing quite as well. 0.67, and finally one last check. 0.63. So one of the issues with today's example was the fact that we're not quite to mid-season in this rice, and so we do still have quite a bit of water showing, not complete canopy closure. Part of that's throwing in, if you were watching the numbers bounce just a little bit as we moved over the average of the plot area, that's where some of that drag in value is going to come from, even though we're on very well fertilized rice plots for the most part at this timing. So something you definitely want to be conscious of walking those fields using this device. If you're starting to go over a thin area, you probably want to disregard that and start over for that run. So one great question that we get, okay, you've told us about the GreenSeeker and how to use it. Now what do I do with the numbers that I get from it? It's actually pretty easy. Essentially, you're always going to get a value that's less than 1. So if you noticed on the reading 0.72, 0.6, things like that. So essentially, if you have a reference plot to use, it's always going to have a very high value. We'll say, for instance, 0.8, 0.84, something like that. So essentially, you're going to go out there and you're going to divide that reference plot value, say 0.84, by the average readings you've got across the field. So if you've got a 0.8 reading and your average field reading was, say, 0.68, that's going to give you a response index value, that's what we call it, resulting value, of about 1.15. It's at that point in time that we actually recommend a mid-season nitrogen application. So essentially, if you have a value 1.15 or higher, upward toward 1.12, from 1.15 upward toward 1.2, at that point in time, 1.15 or greater, you have a greater than 50% chance of a response to mid-season nitrogen. If it's a less than 1.15, you have less than a 50% chance of a response. So starting to get on the side of negative returns, it's not really likely that we're going to get a response. If you have a value greater than 1.2, it means you have a greater than 90% chance of a response to that mid-season fertilizer. We're going to strongly encourage you at that point to make that application. Less than 1.15, we have a hard time making that recommendation. It usually doesn't generate much of a response at all to pay for that application. Sometimes we see virtually nothing. So definitely want to stay away from it in that situation. You do also have the option to help with that calculation and conversion if you want to go to riceadvisor.uaex.edu. There you can actually go to the GreenSeeker calculator and enter your values, and it'll calculate that response index for you. Again, not too difficult to do on your own either, but just another tool we've tried to provide to make that calculation easy, and the reminders on the 1.15 and 1.2 values for making your decisions for using the GreenSeeker technology, this handheld device, to make your mid-season determinations. In the event that you don't have a reference plot established prior to getting on the permanent flood and your large pre-flood nitrogen application, you do still have an opportunity to make that application. It's just going to be slightly more difficult. So if you can still get out there within a week or so, hopefully, after that flood has gone on the field, you can still, again, you're going to want to mark it with a flag just to be sure, but put a flag out there in that same roughly 5 by 5 foot area. If you can find that paddy where the water has really stopped flowing out, you know, we've at least got that levee closed up where we're going to put it so the water's not moving too much. Instead of 1/3 of a cup of urea, roughly, as we mentioned when it's going on dry ground at normal timing that spot, go ahead and add about a full cup to that of urea to that 5 by 5 foot area, and that should still be enough to overload that spot to give you a relevant reference plot for use later in the season in just 2 to 3 weeks once we get to that mid-season nitrogen timing. So for a lot of rice, we're still going to flood. Some are certainly getting near that mid-season timing. We're hitting it. We've looked at some where the joints are already moving in very early planted stuff, but for a lot of rice out there, there's still an opportunity to use these reference plots, and so we definitely want to take advantage of that and see that we get to continue using this technology to make these mid-season determinations. Starting to get quite a few calls right now about this rice is starting to pale up a little bit. We're approaching mid-season. Should I make this application or not? This is really the root behind Dr. Roberts' work, is trying to get away from these subjective calls that we've made for all of these years and move towards something that's a little bit more objective, where we can take a reading or a measurement and relate it to what's actually happening throughout the field. Final thing is, for relatively small fields, say 50 acres or less, one reference plot may be okay if you think it's a pretty uniform field. However, we do encourage one on each end of the field just to make sure there's no variability in that, and certainly the larger the field gets, the more we encourage more reference plots, just to include all the variability in the field, differences in flying, all those other things going on. Thanks again for joining us on another episode of Rice and Advice. Hope you've enjoyed it today. A little bit of our discussion about plant development, that half-inch internode elongation timing, and using the GreenSeeker as well to help us determine the appropriate time to make a mid-season application. See you next time.